In order to understand what is happening today, we have to go back to the very beginning. And now I can't give you specific times, but what I can do is help you gain a better understanding of what our true human history really looks like. Because, as I said in the previous video, there have been a lot of lies, there has been a lot of distortion, there has been a lot of misinformation, which has served to keep humanity stuck in lower levels of consciousness. Because what we have to understand is that humanity, or let's say our experience of reality, is governed by frequency and vibration. Now, what quantum physics shows, what cymatics show, what the the presence of the Schumann resonance shows is that, and this is also what Nikola Tesla said, that to truly understand reality, we must think in terms of vibrations and frequency, because everything at its baseline is energy, is vibration, different things vibrating at different frequencies and therefore appearing in different ways. So to bring it back to the human experience, the human body is made of matter, which is matter vibrates at a different frequency than, let's say, thoughts. Thoughts are non-tangible, but they are very real. For example, the wind is non-tangible. We cannot see it, but we know that it exists because we feel it. We can say the same about emotions, because emotions are different states, different vibrational states that we can feel at different moments in time. And whilst emotions, again, are not visible, are non-tangible, we know that they are real because we feel them in our bodies. Now, we have lived in a world where for many years, and let's just say since the rise of the patriarchal system, which really goes all the way back to Mesopotamia and Sumeria, that was listed as the first civilization, though there were civilizations that existed before then, advanced civilizations that operated far more on spiritual principles than the principles that have governed human existence since that time. And so when we break it down, one of the universal laws is the law of gender, saying that everything has its opposite. So just like as human beings, there is male and female, but when I talk about masculine and feminine energies, I'm not necessarily referring to gender and to the sexes. What I'm referring to is that different energies can manifest as either masculine, which are positive, or feminine, which are negative. Principles that belong to masculine energy are things like logic, things like analytics, things like structure and control. And if we look at the patriarchal system in which we have lived for many years, these are the principles that have dominated the human experience. On the other side, we have feminine principles, which are things like emotions, harmony, intuition, beauty. These are feminine principles that were very much honored in ancient civilizations, for example, ancient Egypt. When you go to ancient Egypt, you can see that beauty, spirituality, the honoring of nature were very much a part of their society, and these were feminine principles. Now, we have to go back to even before the beginning of civilization, or should I say Sumeria, because this is where the distortion of the truth of our human history really began. Because we first have to understand that as human beings, religion was introduced as the first form of psychological manipulation to make human beings believe that we are less than we are. But remember, we were not created by accident. When you look at just how advanced the human body really is, the fact that all this time later, doctors and scientists still can't fully understand how the human body works, because it is most probably the most advanced piece of machinery that was ever created. And it was created with absolute precision. even mathematical precision, we can go into the golden ratio, which essentially is the numerical equation for how all life is created. So even the distance between our wrist and our elbow is the same as the distance between of our feet. And now I'm not a mathematician. In fact, my mathematical skills are very, very limited. But math is another, or should I say, the universe also speaks through numbers. And we have seen in advanced architecture, such as the pyramids, that were aligned, perfectly aligned to certain certain planetary alignments, even well before the telescope was ever invented. For example, the Dogon tribe of Mali knew about Sirius B, a star that is not visible with the human eye. They knew about it well before the telescope was invented, because if you look at their ancient stories, they say that they came from the stars. And if we look through many ancient civilizations, the story speaks of people who came from the stars. Because we as human beings, we did come from the stars. We came from the cosmos. We were created with much more advanced knowledge than we can possibly understand. And what we have to know is that way back when humanity was created by the Most High, by Source, whatever you want to call it, that we were created as divine beings. We were created, as I said already, as a fractal of source energy, as a way for God, the Most High, the universe, to experience itself in multiple different forms through each individual human being. Because each individual human is a piece of consciousness experiencing life in a different way, which is why I always say reality is subjective rather than objective. Because 8 billion people on this planet, we are all experiencing our own version of reality. And that is why we can also talk about the human experience being multidimensional, because we can experience multiple different things at the same time. Now, what we have to understand again is that we were created as stewards of this planet, because Earth is really seen as a planetary library. What we have to understand also is that DNA is essentially a biological piece of equipment that has the ability to carry copious amounts of information. So it's like having the biggest hard drive you could ever imagine, with so much information downloaded into that hard drive. That is what DNA represents. So human DNA, animal DNA, plant DNA. DNA holds copious amounts of information. Every living organism on this planet holds DNA that holds a lot of information that does not only come from this realm. Now stay with me. I know I'm talking about some very complex topics here, but this is important to understand what will come later. So when we look through human history, we realize that what has always been current is there has been a lot of war. Everything has always been driven by war. And what really is war is a difference, is when two different groups have to fight each other because they don't agree on something. And if we look back to every single war that has ever been fought, what the war has really been about has been fighting about ideology. Because all that time ago, thousands and thousands of years ago, going back to a time before war existed, because when the earth and humanity were first created, everything was created in pure perfection. And again, I might reference the Bible, but I'm not referencing the Bible from a religious perspective. I'm referencing the Bible as supporting material to what I am saying, because there are a lot of scriptures, biblical and otherwise, that really talk about the things that I'm talking about here, that reference these things. And that is why in my previous video I said context is so important, because if we are reading information without the right context, it's very easy for that information to be misinterpreted and misunderstood. So again, as I said in the previous video, to think that we as human beings are alone in this universe is absolutely preposterous, because even the human DNA that we carry was made up of DNA that came from beings that were not of this realm. And this is why I say that we are cosmic in origin, we are divine in origin, because the original human DNA template, which was a 12-strand DNA, which made us capable of having very advanced levels of spiritual knowledge and abilities. This is what allowed us to communicate telepathically between us, to communicate telepathically with nature, with animals, because this is how humans existed in ancient civilizations such as Hyperborea, Lemuria, and even Atlantis. Now, we have been told through general history that these were, I forget the word, but that these were simply allegories. But Atlantis was a very real place that existed. And I know that it existed because I have memories of a time when I existed in Atlantis. Because what we have to remember is, yes, the physical body dies after a certain time, but the soul, the human spirit, which is what animates this physical body, never dies. The human soul reincarnates over and over again. And the human soul reincarnates either on this planet or many other planets that exist out there, including the planets where our DNA originally came from. And these include planets such as, or maybe these are rather civilizations, I don't really know what to call them, but civilizations such as Lyra, the Pleiades, Andromeda, Arcturus. And those of you who resonate with the term starseeds will understand that the original human genome originated from parts of these different areas, advanced civilizations that were far more advanced than the human being as it appears today. But a time existed thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. I wouldn't be able to put a time date on it, because this is now cosmic wisdom and cosmic knowledge. All those years ago, what we have to understand is that all of life was divided into two main parts. You have the group that honors service to others. These are people who are believers in the law of one, people who believe that all of life generated from the same spark of consciousness, from the same divine source. And then on the other side, you have those who are followers of service to self-consciousness, those who care more about their individual power and their individual needs, rather than realizing that everything we do has an impact on the whole at large. And so let's say we had the positive current and the negative current. The positive current, which was made up of civilizations such as Lyra, Andromeda, the Pleiades, etc. And on the opposite side, we had what I like to call the Orion Alliance. Now, the Orion Alliance was made up of beings that came from the Alpha Draconis star system. This is who we now know as the Draconians or the Reptilians. We also had the Orion Greys, also known as the Zeta Reticulans. We also had what we now know as the Anunnaki. So these were factions of beings who operated very much in service to self-consciousness and wanted to rebel against God, let's call it, against the Most High, against source consciousness, and wanted to focus on dominating life in other parts of the galaxies. At one point, what we have to understand is Gaia, Earth, was a living celestial being that held copious amounts of information within her DNA. Her DNA, which was also seeded by civilizations from other parts of the cosmos. Now, wars broke out across the galaxies, just the same ways of wars and colonization that we have seen here on Earth. The same energies took place in the cosmos at large, and there were great wars that took place that destabilized the balance of the cosmos and the universe at large. At one point, these negative beings, I want to call them interdimensional beings, that existed in a third density and in a lower fourth density, suddenly turned their attention to Earth because they understood that Earth had many stargates, many interdimensional portals that allowed them to travel to different parts of the galaxies. And these beings understood that controlling Earth would allow them to control different areas of the galaxies because they would be able to travel to different parts of the galaxies through the stargates that were available here on Earth. And now these are stories that you hear spoken of within the Enuma Elish, within ancient texts such as the Nag Hammadi texts that are the ancient Gnostic texts, and there are many other ancient civilizations that speak of this. In fact, there is a lot more information that came out to state that the Iraq war that took place when the Americans went over is because they became aware of a stargate that Saddam Hussein still had in Iraq. And remember, present-day Iraq was ancient Sumeria, the first civilization that was anchored into Earth by the Anunnaki and the Orion Alliance once Atlantis had fallen, and therefore the ancient ways had fallen with it. Because Atlantis represented a time where humanity was still operating out of balance. The patriarchal system had not fully taken over, and there was still an understanding that spirit, feminine energy, and matter, masculine energy, had to live in harmony and balance in order for life on Earth to be what it was meant to be. And so what then happened was that Atlantis began to fall. Atlantis was infiltrated. And now I'm still not certain. I can't pretend to say that I know absolutely everything. I'm still putting all of the pieces together. But let's say Earth's energetic field, and this is what the Schumann resonance describes as the vibrational frequency of Earth, because when we talk about living in a firmament, this is not a physical, firmament. This is not a physical dome that is encapsulating us. It is an energetic dome that is vibrating at a certain frequency. And when that dome vibrates at certain frequencies, things can come in and out. And that is how the Anunnaki and the Draco and all these foreign interdimensional beings were able to enter into Earth's field and start manipulating human consciousness. And the way human consciousness was controlled and manipulated at those times was there were many different ways in which this was done. And now remember, when I talk about the Anunnaki and the Orion Alliance and all these beings that were intergalactic and interdimensional beings, they came into our field, but they were far more advanced than humanity in terms of the technology that they had. And they started introducing this technology. And when I talk about technology, I don't only mean, for example, a phone or a computer, that kind of technology. They also introduced technology in the form of different rituals, different methodologies of doing things, which can also be called technology. And so what they did was they entered into Earth's field because their intention was to control this planet and to control Earth. Because remember, these beings that were now operating in service to self-consciousness, they essentially were rebelling against Source, against God, against the Most High, against all that is divine. And remember, human beings were created as avatars for the divine to experience itself in physical human form. And so the intention of these negative beings was to essentially disrupt everything that was divine, everything that connected us to God. And so they entered into Earth's field and they started manipulating. Now, these beings, maybe they were able to come in physically, I don't know. But what I do know that they were 100% capable of doing was they were able to influence the consciousness and the minds of human beings. Let's say that these beings, if we want to give them another name, is we can call them astral parasites, or we can call them demons. They might not have, they were probably able at one point, because we have to understand that way back when, Earth vibrated at a much higher frequency than what it is today, which made things that we might consider supernatural today very possible of existing back then. Because what has been happening for thousands and thousands of years is that these beings have been manipulating the energetic frequencies here on Earth in order to control human consciousness and control the evolutionary trajectory of humanity and this planet. So everything that we have seen taking place since the time Atlantis fell, which was, they say, was about 12,000 years ago, but I want to say it actually goes further back. Now, ever since then, there has been human manipulation on this planet. We have not been living out of free will and just allowing consciousness to evolve naturally. Everything that we have seen taking place has been manipulated and controlled by these interdimensional beings that have been controlling everything that we see taking place. And now this is really where I want to get into the meat and bones of it all, because it's important to understand that what has been controlling reality is not human. There has been interference from interdimensional beings from thousands and thousands of years, and these beings operate behind the system that we call the Matrix, behind the many systems of control that exist today, whether this be religion. The first false belief systems were introduced by the Anunnaki gods. These were the gods that the Sumerians and the Babylonians worshipped, because they no longer worshipped the true source, the true God. Because you have to understand that before Atlantis fell, what was taking place, or how humanity operated, was under the 12 universal laws, which essentially said, human beings, and remember, human beings back then are not the human beings of today, because our DNA was manipulated. Our DNA, when biblical scripture talks of the fact that, I think it's in the book of Genesis, that they talk about when, and I forget the way they say it, but the sons of God procreated with human women and bore offspring that were known as the Nephilim. And these were essentially giants that were created because these interdimensional extraterrestrial beings procreated with human women. And did they physically lay with them and have sex? I don't know. But what I do know is that they had extremely advanced levels of technology, including the ability for genetic manipulation. So when we see today genetical manipulation that is happening both at a human level as well as at a planet, at an organism level, this technology came from these interdimensional beings all the way back during the times of Atlantis. Because as I said, human beings originally had a 12-strand DNA, whereas today we only have 2 strands. One strand that came from these interdimensional beings, and another strand that came from the original humans. And so Scientists today talk about junk DNA, saying that 90% of our DNA cannot be explained and is just junk. That is because that DNA is not entirely human. That is the DNA that came from all the other interdimensional races that were used to seed the human being. And this is where this cosmic knowledge comes from. And this is what governments for thousands and thousands of years have worked so hard to bury and to hide, because if humanity knew that we are far more advanced than we realize, then we would not be able to be manipulated. And the easiest way to manipulate a species that is extremely advanced is to make them believe something that is entirely false. And let's just talk about the absolute power of belief, because again, scientists today can still not explain something that is called the placebo effect. The fact that just by somebody believing that they are getting better, they have the ability to heal themselves, that is the extreme power of human belief. That our beliefs can literally create our reality is scientifically proved and backed by the placebo effect. And so religion was brought in, false religion where it was no longer about worshiping ourselves, being connected to source, living in harmony with both spirit and matter, which is what advanced ancient civilizations did, and how they were able to accomplish such advanced feats that we were not capable of experiencing or understanding today, because we call these things supernatural when they were just natural human abilities. And so religion was the first form of psychological manipulation that was introduced to humanity to make us believe that God is external to us, and even introducing false religious systems that introduced false gods. And so all the gods that are being worshipped and all the different religions that have pervaded human existence for so long, and that have been the foundational cause of all wars since the first war that erupted in Atlantis, which was the separation now on Earth between those who followed service to others versus service to self. And that has been the great war. That has been the war between good and evil, of those who wish to preserve love, unity, humanity, compassion, togetherness, as opposed to control, domination, enslavement, and hierarchy. And all of these, what I've said here on service to self-consciousness, domination, control, these are not things that were originally part of the human experience. These were energies, forces that were introduced by the interdimensional beings that entered into Earth's field all those years ago during the times of Atlantis, and started to corrupt the human genome, corrupt human DNA. We see these same things playing out again, because remember, everything in this world is cyclical. And if we don't understand our past, we can never understand what is happening right now. Because just like the human genome and our DNA was manipulated by these beings, we see the same things happening today. Look at the fact that most of our food today is genetically modified. The DNA of food that was originally created by the Most High God has been manipulated through science and technology. And so these interdimensional beings that existed way back then during the times of Atlantis and during the times of Sumeria, and that existed in each civilization following that as the gods that were being worshipped, the pagan gods that were being worshipped by all of these different cults that existed across the world and that rose and developed across the world through each major civilization throughout the ages. These are the negative interdimensional forces that seek to enslave Earth and all human existence. These are the beings that have presented themselves through science and technology, the same things that were being worshipped in Atlantis, because before Atlantis was created, everything was about spiritual technology. But as things began to shift, as consciousness began to fall on Earth because of these influences, what happened was new technology, new sciences were introduced. And isn't it interesting, during 2020, the recurring words that were spoken was, follow the science, trust the science. And because that was regurgitated over and over and over, and because human beings were made to have such extreme fear through the media, constantly telling them you are going to die. X amount of people have died because of this disease, a virus that was man-made and that has now been proven. The fact that there are ongoing hearings within the Senate and higher levels of government where information is now coming out finally to prove that what the conspiracy factualists had been saying over and over again, that this was a pandemic. It was not natural. It was created. It was created to create so much fear in human beings that people would accept absolutely anything that they were told. And people were told, trust the science. And because we have been made to believe that science is so evolved that only the scientists can possibly understand this extremely advanced and complicated information, that we have to trust the scientists. Now, what one has to understand is those who took over in Atlantis were the scientists, were the ones who were introducing new technology that was being introduced to them by interdimensional beings who sought to control human existence and subjugate humanity to their will, not to the will of God, not to the will of the Most High, but the will of interdimensional beings that are below the Most High, but who believe that they can take over the position of the Most High. And this is where biblical scripture talks about the fallen angels. The fallen angels is really another word to say interdimensional beings who were extremely advanced, who then fell and rebelled against God, who sought to control humanity and take them away from God. And so during the 2020 pandemic, when people were kept in such fear, when the media was used to psychologically manipulate people into accepting more control, because that is what 2020 was about. 2020 was a stepping stone towards the 2030 agenda. The 2030 agenda that has been widely publicized by groups such as the World Economic Forum, that have said very widely that human reduction or the population reduction is absolutely necessary for human existence to continue. Again, these are human beings who are trying to play God. And they are playing God in that, remember, the human DNA, the original 12-strand human DNA that was created by the Most High and by the cosmic influences of the positive beings of the cosmos, that DNA was manipulated and genetically modified through mRNA technology that was introduced through the treatments that were being offered by the globalist organizations such as the World Health Organization, mandated by the United Nations, really an organization that was introduced as a means of setting about this globalist agenda of subjugating all of human life. And this might sound crazy, But this is exactly the same thing that happened in Atlantis that is happening again today, where our DNA is being modified so that new technology was introduced into people that allowed their DNA to be manipulated from the inside out. And now, once your DNA has been manipulated, then you are no longer fully human. Because remember, when biblical scriptures spoke of the sons of God procreating with human women to create a hybrid race known as the Nephilim that originated as giants, but the descendants of these Nephilim still exist today. But they no longer appear as giants, but they appear just like you and me as human beings, but their consciousness is not fully human because in their DNA, they carry the DNA of a non-human race. And this is why we hear about the blue bloods. The blue bloods, which were essentially, let's say, the royal monarchies, the royal bloodlines, and maybe some of you have heard that all people who have ever ruled the world, that have ever been in positions of power, whether these are monarchs, presidents, whatever, they all carry the same bloodline. Because yes, all of these bloodlines have existed or are descendants of these Nephilim bloodlines that were created back in the times of Atlantis that allowed these interdimensional beings to continue ruling Earth through beings that appeared human but that were not entirely human. And this is why throughout history we have always had monarchs, including people like the Pope, who said that they had the divine right to rule. But the divine right from who? Because it isn't the Most High God, it is the false gods that they have been worshipping for millennia. And these beings, those in the highest levels of positions of power, those who are pushing about this globalist 2030 agenda, which is being entirely supported and rolled out through globalist institutions such as the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. These are all institutions that were created over hundreds of years as part of a plan that was instigated thousands of years ago with the fall of Atlantis to literally subjugate Earth and the entire human population. And this might sound absolutely crazy, and that is absolutely okay, because what I am speaking is 100% the truth. And it is important that we understand that everything happens cyclically, because what started in Atlantis is continuing again today. And this mRNA technology, which is also appearing as CRISPR technology, is literally the manipulation of the human genome to create a new race, to create a new species, a species that is merging human with machine. And this is now where we start going into the transhumanist agenda, an agenda which is fully backed by the World Economic Forum. And what we have to understand is that those who belong to the World Economic Forum are literally those who control the way the trajectory of human evolution is going. These are the beings who decide all of the laws, the policies that govern the human experience. And these are essentially the bloodline families that are still the descendants of the Nephilim. They do not honor and live by the rules of the Most High, but they rule by the, they, let's say, worship these interdimensional gods, these alien beings that have been controlling humanity from a different dimension for as far back as we can remember. Technology such as CERN, where you have scientists who have been involved in CERN, the largest hadron collider in the world, that have been smashing together particles, where they even found what they call the God particle, literally how reality itself is created. And if they have the ability to manipulate what literally the fabric of reality, then they can control reality, which is where now we come into the fact that many people talk about the fact that whenever the Hadron Collider is on, we start experiencing parallel universes, which is what is manifesting as the Mandela effect. The fact that some people remember things one way and other things remember things other way, because what is happening is that there are multiple parallel realities, multiple dimensional realities that exist at the same time, one on top of each other. And what CERN is doing is opening portals into these different realities, allowing interdimensional beings that should not have access to this dimensional reality to enter into this field. And this is now where we get demons, because part of the technology that was introduced during the times of Atlantis by these Anunnaki, Orions, Draco reptilians, and so on, was the rituals to be practiced in order to open dimensional portals to allow these entities to enter into Earth's field and to continue to manipulate humanity and Earth through distorted energetic frequencies. And so this is what is happening today. And this is why it is important to understand why there is a push towards disclosure, because what is happening today is that these beings that have been in control of human existence for thousands and thousands of years, well, their time is now up. Because, as I said in my previous video, everything is interconnected. And what is happening now is that we are coming back to a specific frequency, that Earth is coming back to a certain frequency that can no longer allow life that is not in the same vibrational frequency as her to continue existing on this planet. And that is why we are seeing so many natural disasters take place, is because Earth, which is a living celestial being, is no longer able to withhold life that is not vibrating in the same frequency as her. But also, we are now coming into a time of judgment, where the Most High is judging every single being on this planet and taking out all life that is not in alignment with service to all consciousness. Because it is time for the planet to move into a new dimensional reality. And if we are not prepared to move with her, then our lives will not continue. And it is important to understand all of these things, because all of the systems, whether this is government, whether religion, education, media, these are all systems that were put into place by these nefarious interdimensional beings, being controlled by human beings that carry non-human DNA, in order to allow them to continue to maintain their dominance and control here on Earth. But that time of dominance is coming to an end. And we get to choose, are we going to be on the side of service to others' consciousness or service to self-consciousness? And that is where we decide, are we on the path of good or are we on the path of evil? And it is not just simply saying, I am with God. It is through actions, embodied actions, that we will be judged by the Most High as whether we will live or we will die. And that is where we are today. That is what we are seeing taking place right now, is that the world that was controlled by these evil interdimensional beings, that has been upheld by human beings, is starting to fall. But we have to be right, in the right frequencies, in order to uphold, in order to survive this massive shift that is taking place, because this shift is not going to be easy. But the more we understand what is really taking place, the easier it will be for us to move through this shift. So if you have resonated with this content, please like it, please share it with who you feel might need to hear this information. And if you want to continue hearing information from me and learning more about what is really taking place in this world, then please follow the channel and I will see you in next week's video. Also, if you are somebody who is on the path of transformation and would like to work with me, because my focus at this time is to help people understand why they are here and to regulate their nervous system so that they can step into the mission that their soul chose for them to come and live out in this lifetime, then you will find all the information in the description box below as to how you can work with me. I'm sending you so much love. Stay strong on this journey. Stay grounded. Make sure that you are spending a lot of time to regulate your nervous system, because this is really what is going to help us to get through this journey at this time, which is not easy. But know that we are not alone and we are experiencing one of the most incredible transformations at an individual, collective, and planetary level.